What you're seeing right now is not some strange homemade video, but footage of an actual scientific experiment published in one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals, Science. In fact, it was considered so influential that it was selected as one of the top 10 scientific breakthroughs of 2016. The lead author of the paper was Professor Kano. He has been studying great apes for over 20 years, and his research shows that great apes are not only able to understand how other individuals think about the world, but are even able to predict how someone will act based on what that individual has seen. This type of complex thinking has long been considered to be uniquely human. But through the use of innovative eye tracking technology, Kano has shown that this ability seems to be something that the great apes possess as well. But this story is so much more than just the findings, because Kano's experiments represent some of the most bizarre, impressive, but also fun experiments I've ever seen. So next, let's introduce how all of this even began. Kano says he's always been fascinated by how the world looks through the eyes of other animals. As a child, he would often watch the animals around him and wondered what was going on inside their minds. And there was one animal that fascinated him more than any other, the chimpanzee, one of our closest living relatives. He wanted to know how they saw the world and if the world through their eyes resembled the way we experience our own. That curiosity followed him into university, where he began studying if chimpanzees could interpret social cues from images using eye tracking technology. This absolutely fascinated him, and his research during these years would prove pivotal to his later career. And in 2012, after his graduation, he decided to pursue his research further at a leading research facility in Leipzig, Germany. The institute was dedicated to understanding the evolutionary roots of the human mind by studying our closest living relatives. There he would spend his days working closely with chimpanzees, bonobos, and other great apes. But soon, Kano found himself wondering the same questions that had fascinated him since childhood. What was actually happening inside a chimpanzee's mind when it watched the world around it? See, humans are able to do something quite remarkable without thinking. We can consider that others also have minds and will naturally try to anticipate what others want to do. However, whether chimpanzees or other animals are capable of this has been a mystery for many decades. That is what Kano wanted to find out. So next, let's take a look at his research. Before Kano could even begin to test this, he was immediately faced with a very difficult question. How do you even begin to look into the mind of an animal that you can't directly communicate with? As he pondered this question, he thought back to his graduate days. During then, he had conducted an experiment where he had used eye tracking technology to study how humans and chimpanzees looked at the same images. He found that much like us, they seemed to have the ability to discern the intentions of the individual in the image based on non-verbal cues like body language and posture. And that gave him an idea. He thought that maybe their eye movements could help reveal not just what they were looking at, but actually give us a glimpse inside their mind. This made him really excited, and he began designing an experiment to try and test this. While Kano is trying to design his experiment, I want to take a moment to introduce today's sponsor, Hungry Minds. Hungry Minds was created by a group of people with a real passion about learning about the world. Their books are handcrafted by real writers and artists, not generated by AI. I went on their website to check this, and they've been around since 2021, and they have detailed blog posts of how their lead illustrator, Lev Kaplan, comes up with ideas for their illustrations, which is something that I really appreciate. The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization is designed to be visually beautiful, but also full of fascinating stories about our history and inventions that make up the world around us today. And because so much care has gone into the artwork and design, it's the kind of book you can come back to again and again and notice new details in the illustrations and design each time. So whether you're looking for something for yourself, or a thoughtful gift for a family member, or someone just naturally curious, Hungry Minds can be a really good option. You can check out the book using the link below and use the code BURB at checkout for a 10% discount. Thank you again to Hungry Minds for supporting the channel. And now let's take a look at Kano's experiment. To test if chimpanzees may be able to understand the intentions of others, Kano would first show the chimpanzees a video that he made of himself reaching for a squish toy of either a frog or a duck. They would then be shown this 3 times before they were eventually shown a second video where the positions of the frog and duck would be reversed. This time, the hand would reach between the 2 items before pausing. Kano would use eye tracking technology to record where they were looking. When this test is done on humans, the majority of people will naturally look towards the frog, and this is considered to be a form of advanced intelligence where it's a combination of pattern recognition and understanding what the subject in the video is trying to do. So next, let's take a look at how the chimpanzees responded. You can see in this case that the positions of the duck and frog are reversed, but when Kano extends his arm, the chimpanzees immediately look towards the frog. And he found that in a group of 19 great apes, they achieved similar results to that of human participants. A quick note that for the rest of this video, I'm going to use chimpanzees and great apes interchangeably, as Kano primarily tests chimpanzees, but will also bring in other ape participants.
単純に手の先を反射的に見ているわけじゃない。取ろうとしているものを本当に見ている。類人は他者の意図を理解するかっていう、その一部の能力がその研究では認められたと思いますね。
What's even more interesting is that when he later repeated this experiment with a claw instead of a hand, the chimpanzees did not predict the target of the claw, and it suggests that they were not just tracking motion, but were instead interpreting the actions of the human hand as goal-oriented and made with intention. These findings are strikingly similar to those reported previously for human infants. Now, this might seem like a fairly simple experiment, but Kano was very excited by this as it showed that maybe there really was a way to understand what these animals were thinking. So in the coming days, he began planning his next experiment. In his spare time, he would build each of the eye tracking tools for the chimpanzees himself, and this time he wanted to try something much more complex, something called the Sally Ann experiment. This is one of the most famous experiments that's used to test for the ability to understand someone else's perspective. Here's how it works. In this experiment, the subject is tested on whether they can understand Sally's mind. First, Sally puts a ball into a basket and then leaves the room. When Sally is outside the room, Anne moves the ball from a basket to a box. Then Sally returns and tries to play with the ball, and at this point, the subject is asked whether Sally will look inside the basket or the box. The point of this experiment is that the subject is being asked about the location of the ball that Sally is thinking about and not necessarily the current location of the ball. To us, this is quite simple, and we know that because Sally didn't see the ball get moved, she'll try to look inside the basket. So Kano tried to adapt this experiment for chimpanzees. First, the chimpanzees are shown a video where the frog and duck toy are hidden under a lid. Next, Kano would reach out and uncover the lid to grab the duck toy underneath. He would then turn around, during which the location of the toys are swapped before being covered again. Finally, when he turns back and reaches for the toy, the video is paused and their eye movements are tracked to see where they are looking. If apes really were capable of understanding what Kano was thinking, then they should look towards the lid that previously had the duck toy before it was moved. But when he tested for this, the chimpanzees didn't really care about what he was showing them and looked around randomly. And Kano said this made him really sad because he had put a lot of thought into the video, but the chimpanzees simply didn't care or weren't interested. Over the coming months, he would try different versions of this experiment where he would change the setting or which characters were involved in the scene. But each time, the chimpanzees didn't seem to care. And slowly the frustration began to wear him down. He later joked that winter in Germany was freezing, that he missed the hot springs in Japan, and he just wanted to eat ramen. On many days, he felt he was running on little more than willpower alone, and on days when research felt impossible, one of the few things that kept him going was making models, because it was something he could still enjoy when he felt too drained to do anything else. And for nearly 2 years, the project went nowhere. Eventually, in 2014, Kano finished his studies in Germany and moved to a new research institute in Japan. And it was there that his work finally took a leap forward. The place was Kumamoto Sanctuary, one of the largest chimpanzee research facilities in the world. Here he came across someone that changed his perspective on research forever, Professor Satoshi Hirata. Hirata had been studying chimpanzees for over 20 years and raised many of the chimpanzees at the sanctuary himself. When he heard about Kano's struggles over the years, he thought for a long time before giving a rather unique suggestion. See, Hirata had found over the years that chimpanzees don't really like television or still controlled experiments in general, so it's very difficult to test them like humans. So he suggested, why not create something that was vivid and dramatic instead? It was a bizarre idea because traditional experiments are usually designed to reduce distractions and control for as many variables as possible. But Kano was all out of options himself, so they decided to give it a try. And the next day, without telling Kano, Hirata came to work in an all-black costume and a great ape mask. He mentioned that from his past research, he knew this would be of interest to them. When Kano saw this, he was both amused but also inspired by the creativity from Hirata, and together they began working on an experiment that was truly unique. As they worked through the script, Kano couldn't help but think back to his days in Germany. Back then, the experiments had relied on simple, heavily controlled designs, but here they were freely combining different elements and turning the experiment into something closer to a short story. The entire process felt not only creative, but also fun. And for the first time in a long while, Kano felt genuinely excited to show the movie to the chimpanzees. So next, let's take a look at the video itself. The movie is called King Kong Attack. Yes, that's what it's actually called. Two researchers would position themselves close to each of the two doors. One of these doors served as the control or distractor door. Eventually, the doors would begin flashing and Professor Hirata, dressed up as King Kong, would attack one of the researchers before running away. Now, as strange as this might look, Kano and Hirata wanted to ask two very important questions. First, could chimpanzees remember something that had only happened once, even after a long delay? This might sound obvious at first, but this kind of memory is harder than it seems. Even for humans, single events can fade over time, and some researchers had argued that while animals could remember repeated routines or patterns, remembering a specific event after a delay may be much more difficult. And second, whether this new experimental design could actually hold their attention whilst presenting a complex scenario. So after showing the chimpanzees the movie once, Kano and Hirata waited 24 hours. Then they brought the chimpanzees back and showed them the same scene again. If they really did remember the scene, then similar to the frog toy experiment, their gaze should look towards the gate before King Kong actually appears. Pay close attention to where exactly the chimpanzees are looking this time around. You can see that the chimpanzees begin by scanning the room, much like we do. But quite importantly, their main focus is on the actual subjects within the video itself. This is very different from more complex experiments Kano has tried to run in the past. Once the lights begin flashing, you can see that the chimpanzees focus on the door that King Kong will come out of even before he actually does. And over repeated experiments with great apes, they found this pattern seemed to be very consistent, and that the great apes were much more focused the second time around on the door King Kong would come out of. They also did a later follow-up experiment titled Revenge on King Kong, where instead of the doors, the researchers would reach for either a sword or hammer to fight back against King Kong, but the idea was the same. This provided evidence that great apes could in fact remember single-time events, and Kano and Hirata soon published their study in a paper in 2015. But perhaps the more important thing here was that they noticed that the chimpanzees were very engrossed in the movie. See, in previous eye-tracking studies, scientists have always struggled to keep chimpanzees engaged and often had to feed them juice through a tube while they were watching, but even this wasn't always effective. However, this time they noticed that several chimpanzees were actually so engrossed in the movie that they didn't even care to drink the juice. Now this was what was really exciting for Kano, as it meant that they now had a way to capture the attention of the chimpanzees.
類人がどっかに行かないようにジュースをあげてるんですけど、ジュースを飲むのを忘れてこうやって食い入るように見た類人猿もいるぐらいなので、それはドイツで作ってきた動画とは全然違う手応えを感じたので、これはいけるんじゃないかと思いましたね。
In the coming weeks, Kano started to think about what all of this really meant. He thought back to his days in Germany and was reminded of all the failed versions of the Sally Ann experiment he had tried years ago. Yet as he chatted and laughed with Hirata and his colleagues in the lunchroom, he had a feeling that maybe this time, things would be different. So he decided to try and redesign this experiment one more time. In order to redesign this experiment, Kano and Hirata had to think about what would excite a chimpanzee. Here's what they came up with. The overall idea of the experiment is the same, and it tries to test whether the viewer can understand the mind of the characters themselves. First, King Kong would hide in one of the burrows. This is obviously seen by the human character, and the human would whack the burrow with a stick. They would repeat this several times, and this teaches the chimpanzees that the human is searching for King Kong. Then they would repeat the scenario, but this time when the human leaves, King Kong would crawl into the other burrow before leaving entirely. These two actions are meant to serve as distractors to the chimpanzee audience. Finally, the human would return and they would pay close attention to where exactly the chimpanzees looked. If the chimpanzees really could understand the mind of the human character, then they should look towards the burrow that King Kong first hid in, even though they know he is no longer there. So let's take a look at how this experiment played out. And there's an important detail here. This version of the false belief experiment was only played once to each chimpanzee, meaning they had no previous experience of how the human would act in a false belief scenario. You can see that initially they are very focused on the characters themselves. Eventually, the human character goes into the room to grab a stick, while King Kong moves between the burrows before leaving entirely. Now pay close attention to where the chimpanzees are looking. You can see that they immediately look from the human to the burrow where King Kong previously was. Now this is really interesting because it suggests that chimpanzees really may be capable of understanding other perspectives, even across different species, much like we can. But not just that, it suggests that chimpanzees are able to understand the overall relationship between the characters in the story. Over the next few weeks, they would test slightly different versions of this experiment, like switching the side King Kong initially hid in, or whether the human had seen King Kong move between the burrows before. They even created an entirely new version of the experiment in which King Kong steals and hides a plush toy from the human. The overall idea of the experiment was the same, but Kano and Hirata wanted to test how they would respond in different contexts. And it turns out across 40 participants across the ape family, a statistically significant majority looked towards the correct spot that would allow them to pass the false belief test. And it showed that chimpanzees and great apes really were capable of understanding our minds.
結果がこれまでの説を覆した。これまで人以外の霊長類で理解できるっていう明確な証拠がなかったのに、そうじゃない、ちゃんと理解できてそうだっていうこれまでと違う結果をいい意味で示してた。
In the following year, Kano and Hirata published their findings in a groundbreaking paper in Science, one of the world's most prestigious scientific journals. The study was quickly selected as one of the top 10 most important breakthroughs of 2016, not only for what it suggested about great ape intelligence, but for the creativity of the experiment itself. But we aren't done with Kano's story just yet, because all of this naturally led to one final question. How exactly are they able to understand? Now, it may be natural to think chimpanzees can understand because they are intelligent and related to us. But Kano wanted to know specifically how they came to understand these ideas. For humans, we often understand others by drawing on our own experiences. For example, if you see a person wince when they bite into a lemon, you know it's because the lemon is very sour, because you're applying your own experience to the situation. So did they do something similar? This time, they would show two different groups of chimpanzees a familiarization video which helped them understand the premise. Then they would be divided into two groups. One group was exposed to a transparent panel while the other was exposed to an opaque panel. The two different panels looked completely identical from a distance. Over the course of a day, they would be able to interact with the panel directly and also see different scenarios, like when a person or an object passed behind it. After this, both groups would be put through a new version of the Sally Ann experiment, except rather than leaving the room, the human would stand behind the panel. Kano hypothesized that the two groups would have different reactions to the experiment. Specifically, the group who experienced the non-transparent panel should assume that the human could not see what was happening behind it, and they should expect the human to search in the wrong place, just like in the earlier false belief experiments. While the group who had exposure to the transparent panel would instead use their own experience and interpret that the human could see what King Kong is doing, and therefore would later be able to correctly identify the rock is gone and should instead look around randomly. So let's take a look at how this went. You can see that King Kong first steals the rock from Kano before scaring him away. Then he moves it under the other box before running away with it entirely. Pay close attention to where the chimpanzees look when Kano comes back. You can see that they immediately look towards the right box even though they know there is nothing there. Now let's take a look at the group who was exposed to the transparent panel. The overall design of the experiment is the same, but this time you can see that the chimpanzees show no preference for either side. Over repeated experiments, Kano found the two groups had completely different reactions when they viewed the film. And this is fascinating because it suggests that chimpanzees may be using their own experience as a mental model to not only understand the world around them, but even help them predict how others behave. This is a subjective and rather complex idea that has often been considered to be uniquely human. When Kano later explained this experiment, he was asked if they think the chimpanzees really thought King Kong was a chimpanzee.
That looks funny to you, right? That's a comic. That's a comical to human eyes, but that's kind of look serious to the apes, and we knew that. And then we use that character to fight against the familiar guy, and then to make them excited and then keep them more attentive. So that they of course know that is not their conspecific. They probably think that is a weird alien-looking character, and then just to attract attention. So you know that the biggest innovation that we created in this series of projects is that we are the first chimpanzee director. So we are a director that create movies for chimpanzees. We know that how to interest chimpanzees. So that's the innovation that we created in this project.
Eventually, in 2021, Kano parted ways with the Kumamoto Sanctuary. For almost a decade, he had been chasing an answer to his childhood dream of wondering what does the world look like through the eyes of a chimpanzee. And through his research, he helped reveal that great apes are not only capable of understanding the perspective of others, but may even be using their own experiences to interpret the world around them. That is no small feat. For decades, this has been one of the hardest questions to answer in animal cognition, and is a testament to the creativity of Kano and Hirata's research. But perhaps Kano's journey also reveals something about science itself. That when we're studying living beings who have different interests and thoughts from us, we need more than just careful, cold experimentation, but rather the imagination and creativity to design experiments in ways that animals actually care about. For Kano, that may be one of the lasting lessons of his journey so far. That in his most difficult moments, when he was filled with failure and frustration, he was reminded of something that changed his entire perspective and propelled his work. That good science can still be creative and spontaneous. It can even be fun. Today, he hopes to carry that same spirit into new questions, to understand how other animals cope with their natural challenges using their cognition. From monkeys, pigeons, crows, and even humans, Kano wants to understand how different animals think, how they're able to understand each other, and how large groups are able to make rapid decisions. But perhaps that's a story for a different time. For now, his work serves as a reminder that the distance between us and our closest relatives may be smaller and more familiar than we once imagined. And if we follow their gaze closely, we may catch a glimpse of another mind looking right back.